Hey guys, it's Wednesdays with Chasey Poo. Today I'm joined by Minno and Beauty right over here. My sweet, my loves, babies. Anyways, today we're talking about intersectionality. And I think that this topic is super cool and super important because I am in sociology and we talk a lot about intersectionality, and it's almost like if you have a research now that's not intersectional, it's like, what are you doing? So what the hell is intersectionality? Intersectionality is when you have basically one piece of identity of, and I'm just gonna base it off of trans things, okay? One piece of identity, so you're trans, and then the other piece of identity would be ethnicity, or in America y'all call it race. So that would be an intersectional analysis where you're talking about trans people related to tattoos, but taking an intersectional approach to it would be trans people with tattoos who are also Asian, let's say. So that would be an intersection of identities that you kind of mend together. You don't mend it together, like you put it together in order to make an analysis that's maybe more specific to a group. So this is super important, okay? And when I do research, I do as much as I can to do an intersectional analysis where I don't just grab trans men who are white. Which is a really big problem in a lot of research about trans people. There's a lot of just white trans guys talking about stuff. I'm like, okay. So the research that I did, which I'm not ready to talk about because I'm not finished, but I will just talk about the process of doing it, I guess, is I have 10 participants for my thesis, for my master's thesis, and I made sure that at least half were not white. So to me, that was super important. And in those, I made sure that there were people who were also non-binary, and I made sure that there were people who weren't on T, or who were on T, or who didn't want surgery, and all of these things. So all of these little aspects of life, making sure that it's all kind of put into one big project. So when somebody's reading it, it's not like, oh, this is only catered to like white trans guys who are 25 to 30 years old, who have 3 tattoos, who've been on T for 6 years, who've had top surgery and all of this stuff. Instead, anybody could read this research and be like, oh, I see, you know, I'm black and I'm reading this research, and I can see that this person interviewed somebody who's a black trans guy who is not on T, and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a wider range, and that's super important because we need to use the privilege that we have in order to bring out the voices that aren't usually talked about or aren't represented appropriately in academia. I'm talking about that right now. But let's not talk about academia because that's kind of boring, honestly. Especially because I'm trying to like kind of avoid it. I've been trying to work on my thesis forever and I'm just kind of ignoring it, but yes. So intersectionality is super important, and I think that a lot of people have this weird concept of intersectionality with feminism, and then when you talk about feminism, people are like, oh, social justice warriors, and when you start talking about social justice warriors, then you're going into Tumblr. And hunties, I can't deal with this anymore. Just because you're fighting for social justice, so like somebody is not getting justice, so you are fighting for them, you are automatically categorized as this like horrible person. Sure, there are people who are a little too out there, who are like, okay, relax your titty right now, and get offended at literally everything, like offended at me saying offended, you know what I'm saying? Like, those people exist, and those people are on Tumblr and whatever, that's cool. But it's not a bad thing to fight for people who are either less fortunate or less privileged than you. And I think that this whole like, we have a bad look on what social justice warriors are is just absolutely horrible, because taking an intersectional approach or view on different aspects is a good thing. It's an amazing thing. It includes people who weren't included before. So when you talk about trans murders, for example, and people who are being murdered because they're trans, it is so important to not just say trans people get murdered. Instead, you need to specify trans women of color are the ones who are getting murdered at a disproportionate amount compared to the rest of the community, compared to the LGBT community, compared to the rest of the communities out there. This is a huge problem. So instead of saying yes, trans people are dying, but when we're focusing on one group, trans women of color are being murdered, I think it helps, not divert, but like helps us see and kind of focus why. Why is that? And then you have to think of the layers of identity. So when you're a trans woman of color, 1, you're a woman, 2, you're black, or of color. Of color? Nothing's right. You're a trans woman of color. Let's do it that way. And then it really bases on your sexual orientation. Most trans women of color who are murdered are straight, but if you put in lesbian or queer identity in there, then that's another identifying factor. So you have 3 right there. And that's like, it's almost 3 strikes against you. Obviously, I'm not black. I'm not a trans woman of color either. Like, I can't speak to that experience, but I'm just saying that taking an approach and kind of viewing it in specific ways like that really helps everyone kind of see and try to understand what the problem is in order to try to fix it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, I just rambled. Let me know what you think, I guess, and yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.